The great hall of the Galactic Council fell silent as Ambassador activated the holographic display. The towering stood nearly 3 meters tall, his crystalline skin catching the chamber's soft light as he addressed the assembly of representatives from 47 different worlds. "Honored delegates," began, his voice resonating through the translator systems. "What you are about to witness represents a violation of every civilized law of warfare known to our galaxy." Admiral sat quietly in the human section, watching the alien faces around her. Most showed confusion. Some displayed what she had learned to recognize as their species' version of concern. The delegation huddled closer together, their hive-mind nature making them seek comfort in physical proximity when faced with uncertainty. The hologram flickered to life, showing the rocky surface of 442b. The planet looked dead from orbit but knew better. Hidden beneath its barren surface lay one of the most heavily fortified pirate strongholds in this sector of space. For 3 months, combined galactic forces had tried to break through its defenses. They had failed. "This footage was recovered from automated security systems," continued. "The timestamp shows these events occurred 18 minutes after the human team made planetfall." The hologram zoomed in on a massive fortress built into a mountain. Its walls stretched hundreds of meters high, bristling with energy weapons and shield generators. According to intelligence reports, over 300 pirates defended the complex, along with 47 hostages taken from civilian shipping lanes. Remembered the briefing clearly. The galactic forces had been preparing for another 6-month siege. Standard procedure called for surrounding the fortress, cutting off supplies, and waiting for the defenders to surrender or starve. It was civilized warfare, the kind the galaxy understood. Then 6 figures appeared on the display. They moved across the barren landscape like shadows, their movements fluid and purposeful. Even through the grainy security footage, could see the efficiency in every step. These were her people, her soldiers. 6 humans, announced, his voice carrying a note of disbelief that the translators struggled to convey. Against a fortress that had withstood 3 months of conventional assault. The hologram shifted to an internal security feed. The pirates inside the fortress looked confident, even bored. They had grown comfortable behind their massive walls and energy shields. Some were playing games, others were eating. None of them expected what was coming. The first explosion came from the eastern wall. The blast was precise, surgical, not enough to bring down the fortress, but enough to create a breach exactly where the humans needed it. In the council chamber, several delegates made sounds of surprise. The representative, a creature from a peaceful trading world, actually covered his compound eyes. "How did they penetrate the outer defenses?" asked Counselor, a elderly whose species had mastered defensive warfare over. "Our best engineers said those shields were impenetrable." Admiral could have explained. The humans had not tried to break through the shields. Instead, they had gone under them, using a network of natural caves that the fortress builders had either missed or deemed too dangerous to explore. For humans, dangerous was just another word for possible. The hologram continued. 3 humans entered through the breach while the other 3 moved to secondary positions, watched alien faces around the chamber as they witnessed something their military minds could not process. The humans had split up. In every known form of galactic warfare, units stayed together. Strength came from unity, from collective action. Individual action was suicide. But humans were different. The team inside the fortress moved like they shared a single mind, but without the mental connections that bound species like the. Each human operated independently while somehow maintaining perfect coordination. They used hand signals, subtle movements, and an understanding of each other that seemed almost supernatural to observers who relied on telepathy or hive minds for communication. "They are not following any recognized tactical doctrine," continued, his voice growing more strained. "Watch what happens next." The three humans inside the fortress encountered their first group of pirates. 20 armed defenders versus 3 humans. By every calculation the galaxy understood, the pirates should have won easily. They had superior numbers, defensive positions, and heavy weapons. The fight lasted 8 seconds. Saw the exact moment when the council chamber realized what they were watching. The ambassador stepped back from the holographic display. The delegate made a sound that his translator rendered as a prayer. Even the normally stoic representatives showed signs of distress. "This is not battle," whispered Counselor. "This is slaughter." But Admiral knew better. She had read the after-action reports. Every shot the humans fired was carefully placed. Every movement was calculated to minimize collateral damage. When they encountered hostages, they risked their own lives to ensure civilian safety. When they faced wounded pirates, they provided medical aid. This was not slaughter. This was what humans called professionalism. The hologram shifted between different security feeds, showing the systematic dismantling of the fortress's defenses. The humans moved through the complex like water flowing downhill, following the path of least resistance while maintaining relentless forward momentum. They adapted to each new obstacle, improvised solutions to unexpected problems, and achieved objectives that changed moment by moment based on what they discovered. "Where is their command structure?" asked another delegate. "Who gives them orders?" Admiral almost smiled. That was the question that no alien mind seemed able to grasp. Each human soldier was both a follower and a leader, capable of making command decisions while maintaining unit cohesion. They trusted each other completely while thinking independently. It was a contradiction that most galactic species found literally incomprehensible. The final sequence showed the fortress's main command center. 18 minutes after the assault began, all hostile forces were neutralized, all hostages were safe, and the entire complex was rigged for demolition. The 6 humans emerged through the same breach they had entered, carrying wounded civilians and leaving behind a fortress that would never threaten shipping lanes again. The galactic forces lost 37 ships and over 2,000 lives attempting to take this position, concluded. The humans lost no one, not a single casualty, not even a serious injury. The silence in the council chamber was complete. Admiral stood slowly, feeling the weight of dozens of alien eyes upon her. She had been chosen for this assignment precisely because she understood how other species thought, how they processed information, and how they made decisions. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice calm and steady, "I understand your concerns. What you have witnessed was a routine hostage rescue operation conducted by one of our special operations teams. These soldiers represent the highest level of training and professionalism in human military doctrine." The translator systems worked frantically to convey concepts that had no equivalent in most alien languages. Words like routine and professional took on new meanings when applied to what the galaxy had just witnessed. "Special operations," repeated the translated phrase carefully. "These are your elite forces." "They are highly trained specialists," Admiral confirmed. "But they operate within standard military protocols and established rules of engagement." What she did not say, what she could not explain in terms the galaxy would understand, was that for humans, this was not exceptional. This was simply what soldiers did when civilians were in danger and conventional methods had failed. The galaxy saw Annihilation. Humans saw Tuesday. The transport ship Valkyrie dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Saturn's gravity well. Through the viewports, Titan Station hung in the darkness like a dead star. The massive research facility that had once housed 3,000 scientists and support staff was now completely dark. No lights. No radio signals, no life signs. Sergeant First Class checked his weapon one final time as Echo Team prepared for deployment. Around him, 4 other soldiers performed their own pre-mission rituals with the quiet efficiency that came from years of working together. They had done this dance 100 times before, But Titan Station was different. The reports made no sense. Communications blackout started 6 days ago, Lieutenant Sarah briefed them over the team channel. She was not related to Admiral, but she shared the same calm competence that seemed to run through the human military. Last transmission was a research update about dimensional membrane studies. Then nothing. Corporal James Wright floated near the airlock, his bulk filling the narrow space. Most species would consider him too large for special operations, but humans had learned that size was just another tool. Sometimes you needed someone who could carry heavy equipment or breach reinforced doors. Sometimes you needed someone small enough to crawl through ventilation systems. Echo Team had both. Galactic Command wants us to investigate and report, continued. Simple recon mission. Get in, find out what happened, get out. Private Lisa Park nodded, adjusting her scanner equipment. She was the team's technical specialist, capable of interfacing with almost any known technology. Her small frame carried more computing power than most alien warships. Any theories about what we might find? Best guess is equipment failure, said Specialist David, the team medic. Maybe a reactor breach. Could be life support malfunction. The facility was running some pretty advanced experiments. Knew his teammates were thinking the same thing he was. Titan Station was not just any research facility. It was humanity's most advanced laboratory for studying things that most galactic species preferred to pretend did not exist. Things from dimensions that touched theirs in ways that violated physics and common sense. Things that had names in human files but no equivalent words in alien languages. The Valkyrie docked with Titan Station's main airlock. The seals engaged with a hollow clang that echoed through both ships. Echo Team moved through the transition with practiced ease, their magnetic boots engaging as they entered the station's rotation gravity. The first thing noticed was the silence. Not the normal silence of an empty facility, but something deeper. Something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. His enhanced senses, sharpened by years of training and battlefield experience, screamed warnings that he could not quite identify. Atmosphere is breathable, Park reported, checking her readings. Temperature normal, life support functioning. Then where is everyone? Wright asked. Held up a hand for silence. Through their shared tactical network, she assigned sectors and search patterns. This was where human special forces differed from every other military unit in the galaxy. Without a word spoken, without telepathic links or hive mind connections, 5 humans became a single organism with multiple bodies. They split up. To alien military minds, this was suicide. Units stayed together. Strength came from unity. But humans had learned different lessons from their evolution. Sometimes the pack needed to spread out to find prey. Sometimes individuals needed to take risks for the group to survive. Sometimes the best way to gather information was to cover more ground faster. Moved down the main corridor while Park accessed computer terminals in the research labs. Wright checked the heavy machinery sectors while investigated the medical facilities. Coordinated from a central position, ready to support wherever needed. Each operated independently while maintaining constant awareness of the others through their communication network. The first body appeared in Laboratory Section C. Contact, Park's voice was steady over the comm. I have one casualty, human male researcher, no obvious cause of death. Altered his route toward her position. Through the tactical display in his helmet, he could see Wright doing the same from his sector. This was not training doctrine. This was not following orders. This was 5 people who trusted each other completely, making individual decisions that somehow created perfect coordination. Negative on external trauma, reported as he examined the body. No signs of struggle, he just stopped. Neural activity, asked. Hard to tell. Brain shows some unusual patterns, but the scanner is reading interference, like something is jamming the signals. That was when heard the sound. It was not quite a whisper, not quite static, but something that seemed to come from inside his own head. For just a moment, he felt his concentration slip. His vision blurred. His mind touched something vast and hungry and ancient. Then his training kicked in. Years of meditation, of mental discipline, of learning to function under conditions that would break civilian minds. He pushed the alien presence away with techniques that no galactic species possessed because no galactic species had ever needed them. "Contact," he reported quietly. "We are not alone." Through the station's corridors, shapes began to move. They were not quite solid, not quite energy. They flowed like liquid darkness with too many angles and not enough curves. The scanner readings called them void spawn, creatures from dimensions where physics worked differently and hunger was the only constant. Most galactic military doctrine recommended immediate retreat when facing void spawn. The creatures fed on neural energy and could turn entire populations into empty shells within hours. The standard response was orbital bombardment from a safe distance. Cleanse the entire area and hope the dimensional breach closed on its own. But Echo Team was not most galactic militaries. Rules of engagement, Wright asked, already knowing the answer. "Mission first," replied. "We need to know how they got here and how to stop them." What followed every principle of military science the galaxy understood. The humans did not retreat. They did not call for backup. Instead, they adapted their mission parameters in real time. The simple recon mission became a search and destroy operation without orders from command, without approval from higher authority, without anything more than 5 people deciding that some things were more important than following procedure. Engaged the first void spawn with weapons that should not have affected dimensional entities. But human technology had been designed by minds that refused to accept that something was impossible just because it was difficult. The creatures reeled back from energy patterns that hurt them in ways they could not understand. Park cracked the station's computer systems while under psychic assault that would have left most beings catatonic. She traced the dimensional breach to its source in the deep labs, while fighting off mental attacks that tried to convince her that reality was optional. Wright held that tactically should have been impossible to defend, using the station's own structure as a weapon. He turned maintenance tunnels into kill zones and cargo bays into fortified positions, adapting the environment to human needs rather than accepting it as fixed. Kept the team functional under conditions that no medical training had prepared him for. He developed treatments for dimensional energy exposure using equipment designed for conventional injuries, creating solutions that worked because someone needed them to work. Coordinated it all while personally engaging void spawn that had adapted to human tactics faster than should have been possible. She made command decisions that changed every few minutes as the situation evolved, maintaining unit cohesion through pure force of will and shared trust. 6 hours later, Titan Station was clear. The dimensional breach was sealed using techniques that would be classified for decades. 17 void spawn specimens were secured for research purposes. The bodies of the research staff were recovered for proper burial. An Echo team had collected enough data to prevent similar incidents across human space. None of this had been in their original orders. "Mission complete," reported to command as the Valkyrie prepared for departure. "Facility secure, threat neutralized, returning with samples and data." "Copy that, Echo team. Outstanding work." But knew that command did not really understand what they had accomplished. How do you explain that 5 humans had decided independently to exceed their mission parameters because civilians were dead and more would die if they did not? How do you describe tactics that worked because they were impossible? How do you report success achieved through methods that should not exist? As Titan Station faded behind them, realized that what they had done was not special by human standards. It was just another Tuesday. Another mission where the impossible became routine because someone needed it to be possible. The galaxy would study their after-action reports and completely miss the point. They would see the tactics and the technology but not understand the minds that made them work. They would call it impossible while staring at the evidence that it had happened. But that was a problem for politicians and analysts. Echo Team had work to do. Somewhere else in human space, another impossible mission was waiting for 5 people crazy enough to believe that impossible was just another word for difficult. And they would be ready. Admiral Hun stood before the holographic battle map in his private study, 8 eyes focused on the tactical analysis that had consumed his thoughts for 3 months. The military commander was considered one of the finest strategic minds in the galaxy, his species' natural gift for pattern recognition, enhanced by centuries of warfare against the hegemony's enemies. But humans made no sense. The intercepted transmission from the Battle of Seven played again on his screens. Human forces, outnumbered 5-1, had not only survived but achieved complete victory in less than 4 hours. According to every military principle Hun understood, it should have been impossible. Yet the evidence was undeniable. A soft chime announced an incoming communication from General of the Defense Force. The officer's compound eyes reflected the light from multiple data screens as he connected to the secure channel. Admiral began, his translator converting rapid clicking sounds into standard galactic. Have you completed your analysis of the human engagement protocols? I have reviewed 17 separate encounters, Hun replied, manipulating the holographic display to show battle formations. The pattern is consistent but contradictory. They violate every established principle of military science, yet achieve superior results. A third voice joined the conversation as Commander I connected from the home fleet. The elderly strategist had spent decades studying military history across dozens of species. If anyone could explain human tactics, it would be her. I have been consulting our historical archives, I said slowly. No known species has ever developed similar combat doctrines. The closest analogies come from predator-pack behaviors, but even those lack the complexity we observe in human military units. Hun activated a recording from the Siege of Station. Observe this engagement. A single human unit, 12 soldiers, holds a defensive position against 300 attackers for 14 hours. They should have been overrun in minutes. The 3 commanders watched as the humans demonstrated what their files labeled defensive flexibility. Instead of maintaining fixed positions like every other species, they constantly moved, adapted, and changed their defensive parameters. When one position became untenable, they abandoned it and created new defensive lines. When ammunition ran low, they improvised weapons from maintenance equipment. When communications were jammed, they continued to coordinate through methods that seemed almost telepathic. How do they maintain unit cohesion without a command hierarchy? Asked. His species relied on queen-directed coordination, each soldier following precise instructions from a central intelligence. The idea of independent decision-making during combat was alien to their nature. I have identified what I believe are 3 key factors, Hun said, bringing up a new analysis screen. I am calling it the doctrine, though I doubt it will help us replicate their success. The first factor appeared on the display: operational persistence. Humans continue to function at injury levels that would incapacitate most species, Hun explained. I have documented cases of humans fighting effectively with wounds that should have rendered them unconscious. They seem to possess an ability to ignore physical damage through mental discipline alone. Commander I made a sound of agreement. Our medical officers have studied human physiology. Their pain tolerance is extraordinary, but it goes beyond that. They appear to be capable of consciously overriding their survival instincts when they believe their mission requires it. The second factor replaced the first: tactical fluidity. This is the most disturbing aspect, Hun continued. Human military units operate without rigid command structures. Individual soldiers make strategic decisions that affect entire battle outcomes. They adapt their objectives in real time based on changing conditions. That should create chaos, observed. How do they prevent conflicting orders and tactical confusion? They do not seem to require orders in the traditional sense, I replied. I believe they possess some form of shared understanding that transcends verbal communication. They trust each other to make correct decisions, even when those decisions contradict established plans. The third factor appeared: psychological warfare. Humans instinctively understand how to break enemy morale, Hun said. Not through deliberate intimidation, but through the sheer impossibility of their actions. When facing humans, opposing forces lose cohesion because they cannot predict or counter human behavior. A new voice joined the conversation. Colonel of the Hegemony Intelligence Division connected to the secure channel, her scaled features tense with concern. "Forgive the intrusion," she said, "but I have been monitoring your discussion through intelligence channels. What you describe matches our own observations, but you are missing the larger implications." "Explain," Hun requested. "We have been operating under the assumption that human special forces represent their elite military units," continued. "Recent intelligence suggests this may be incorrect. What if these special forces are not exceptional humans, but merely typical humans trained to military standards?" The silence that followed was profound. Each commander processed the implications through their species' unique cognitive patterns. If human special forces represented baseline human military capability rather than elite performance, it would revolutionize galactic strategic thinking. "Impossible," finally said. "No species could sustain those casualty rates across large populations." "The humans seem to," replied. "Our agents report that human society actually celebrates individuals who sacrifice themselves for abstract concepts like duty or honor. They have cultural mechanisms that encourage the very behaviors we find incomprehensible." Hun pulled up demographic data from human space. The numbers support its hypothesis. Human military recruitment focused on psychological evaluation rather than physical capabilities. They selected for mental traits that most species considered pathological: willingness to risk personal safety for strangers, ability to function under extreme stress, and capacity to make ethical decisions under impossible circumstances. "There is another factor we have not discussed," Commander I said quietly. "Human tactical doctrine assumes failure of primary objectives." She activated a recording from a human training exercise. "Observe their planning process. Every mission includes multiple contingency plans for when things go wrong. They do not plan for success and adapt to failure. They plan for failure and adapt to success." The other commanders watched human officers diagram scenarios that most military minds would not consider. What if communications failed? What if command was eliminated? What if the mission parameters were completely wrong? What if the enemy had capabilities that intelligence missed? What if friendly forces could not provide support? "Most disturbing," I continued, "is that they train individual soldiers to complete mission objectives even if all other team members are eliminated. Each human soldier is capable of independent operation at a level that most of our species reserve for senior officers." General's translator made clicking sounds that indicated deep thought. "Are you suggesting that humans have created a military doctrine based on the assumption that everything will go wrong?" "I am suggesting," I replied, "that humans have created a military doctrine based on the assumption that going wrong is the normal state of warfare. They do not expect plans to work. They expect to improvise under impossible conditions, and they train their soldiers to excel in chaos rather than order." Colonel activated additional data streams. "Intelligence reports from across the galaxy show a pattern. Human civilians in crisis situations display many of the same traits we observe in their military. They organize rescue operations without authority. They sacrifice resources for strangers. They continue functioning under conditions that would cause most species to seek shelter and wait for proper help to arrive. The implications hung in the digital space between them. Every species had evolved different solutions to survival challenges. They had developed perfect coordination. They had mastered defensive cooperation. They had learned to preserve resources through careful planning. The hegemony had created efficient hierarchies. But humans had evolved something different. They had learned to thrive in situations where all other solutions failed, where coordination was impossible, where planning was useless, where hierarchy could not function, where efficiency was meaningless. The doctrine identifies the tactical elements, Admiral Hun concluded, but it cannot explain the strategic implications. Humans have not simply developed effective military techniques. They have created a form of warfare that other species cannot understand, cannot predict, and cannot replicate. What do we do with this information? Asked. The question hung in the silence between four military minds that had spent their careers mastering the science of warfare, only to discover that one species had made warfare into something that was not science at all. It was art. It was magic. It was chaos given purpose and direction by minds that had learned to find order in disorder. We adapt, Hun said finally, and we hope that humans continue to consider us allies rather than obstacles. The communication ended, leaving each commander alone with the realization that the galaxy had changed in ways that could not be unchanged. Humanity had introduced variables into the equation of warfare that made all previous calculations obsolete. The age of predictable conflict was over. The age of human impossibility had begun. The battleship Eternal Wisdom listed badly to starboard as admiral, or watched his Fourth Fleet burn in the vacuum around New Byzantium. Through the bridge viewports, he could see the wreckage of 57 ships scattered across space like broken toys. Each one had carried thousands of his people. Each one had been destroyed by weapons that should not exist. "Sir," his communications officer reported, voice tight with barely controlled panic, "the automated defense grid has eliminated the 7th attack wing. No survivors." Or closed his four eyes and felt the weight of absolute failure. For 6 days, the combined Galactic Defense Force had thrown everything they possessed at New Byzantium's ancient security systems. The planet's AI-controlled weapon platforms had awakened from millennial sleep and decided that all biological life was a threat to be eliminated. 2.3 million civilians were trapped on the surface, while machines that had been built by a forgotten civilization systematically hunted them. Every tactic the galaxy knew had failed. Coordinated assault fleets had been shredded by weapons that analyzed their formation patterns and countered them perfectly. Stealth insertions had been detected by sensors that seemed to read minds. Electronic warfare had been useless against systems that adapted faster than any known technology. The machines were winning because they had been programmed by minds that understood galactic military doctrine better than the galaxy understood itself. "Admiral," came a new voice on the command channel. "This is Admiral of the Human Expeditionary Force. We are entering the system now." Or opened his eyes to see 12 human ships dropping out of hyperspace. 12 ships against automated defenses that had destroyed over 200 galactic vessels. It was either incredibly brave or completely insane. With humans, the distinction was often meaningless. "Admiral," or replied, "I must advise retreat. These defense systems are beyond our ability to counter. We have lost 60% of our combined fleet strength." "Understood. We are deploying task force for direct intervention." Or watched the human ships accelerate toward the planet. They were not the sleek, efficient designs favored by most galactic species. They were ugly, angular craft that looked like they had been built for war and nothing else. As they approached the automated defense perimeter, weapons that had destroyed dozens of ships began to track new targets. The humans opened fire first. What followed violated every principle of space combat that or had learned in 40 years of military service. Instead of maintaining formation and concentrating firepower, the human ships scattered. Each vessel became an independent actor, moving in patterns that seemed random but somehow coordinated. They fired weapons that no galactic military used because they were considered too dangerous, too unpredictable, too likely to cause collateral damage. The automated defenses, programmed to counter logical tactical movements, began to struggle against human chaos. Energy beams that should have found their targets struck empty space where human ships had been moments before. Guided missiles lost tracking locks as human vessels performed maneuvers that should have torn them apart under their own momentum. How are they surviving? Or's tactical officer asked in bewilderment. On the surface of New Byzantium, drop pods began to fall like meteors. Each one carried 5 human soldiers, 40 pods, 200 soldiers total, against a planetary defense network that had stood for thousands of years and weapon systems that could level cities. Captain Sarah Martinez felt her drop pod slam into the surface of New Byzantium with bone-jarring force. Around her, task force spread across the dead landscape in patterns that made no sense to anyone except the humans who were executing them. They had trained for this, not for these specific conditions, but for the moment when everything went wrong and improvisation became the only plan that mattered. "Phoenix teams, this is actual," came Colonel Harrison's voice over the tactical network. "Defense grid command centers are marked on your displays. You know what to do." Martinez led her team toward Grid Section 7, while 40 other teams moved toward their own objectives. Each team operated independently while somehow maintaining awareness of the larger battle. They communicated through coded signals, shared intelligence through encrypted data bursts, and adapted their missions based on what they discovered. The first defense turret opened fire when Phoenix 1 was still 3 kilometers away. The energy beam should have killed all 5 team members instantly. Instead, they scattered like water hitting stone, each soldier moving in a different direction while maintaining team cohesion through methods that no alien observer could understand. "Contact," Martinez reported calmly as buildings exploded around her, engaging automated defenses. What she did not report was that the defense systems were learning. Each shot came closer than the last. Each tactical movement was anticipated more accurately. The machines were adapting to human unpredictability by becoming more unpredictable themselves. It was a race between artificial intelligence and human chaos, with 2.3 million civilian lives hanging in the balance. Staff Sergeant Williams dove through the window of a burning building as plasma fire tracked across his position. His team's demolitions expert, he carried enough explosives to level a city block. More importantly, he carried the kind of mind that could look at impossible problems and find impossible solutions. The Defense Grid Command Center for Section 12 stood 50 meters ahead, protected by energy shields that had turned aside orbital bombardments. Standard doctrine called for siege tactics and coordinated assault. Williams had about 30 seconds before the automated systems finished analyzing his team's movement patterns and eliminated them with surgical precision. He chose neither standard doctrine nor survival. "Fire in the hole," he transmitted, activating every demolition charge his team carried simultaneously. The explosion that followed registered on seismic sensors across the planet. When the smoke cleared, Section 12's command center was gone. So was most of the city block, and so was Staff Sergeant Williams and his entire team. But the defense grid covering the eastern continent flickered and went dark, allowing civilian evacuation ships to begin landing in safe zones. Across New Byzantium, similar scenes played out with mechanical precision. Human teams sacrificed themselves not because they were ordered to, but because the mission required it and someone had to make the choice. They detonated themselves to create breaches. They drew automated fire to allow other teams to advance. They held impossible positions until ammunition ran out, then fixed bayonets and charged weapons platforms that could destroy tanks. Admiral or watched from orbit as his sensors tracked the systematic elimination of defense systems that had seemed invincible hours before. Each human victory came at a cost that made his soul ache. Casualty reports flooded the communication channels with a regularity that suggested someone was reading a shopping list rather than announcing the deaths of heroes. Phoenix 7 is gone. Grid Section 4 is down. Echo Team eliminated. Western Defense Perimeter is breached. Angel Squad destroyed. Civilian evacuation route is secure. In 8 hours, Task Force accomplished what the combined galactic fleet could not achieve in 6 days. The automated defense network that it stood for was reduced to scrap metal and fatting energy signatures. The ancient machines that had nearly eradicated civilization lay silent and broken. The cost was counted in empty drop pods and silent communication channels. Of 200 soldiers deployed, 23 survived. The humans called it acceptable losses. The galaxy called it evidence that humans were fundamentally different from all other intelligent life. Captain Martinez stood in the ruins of New Byzantium's capital city as evacuation ships descended through atmosphere, no longer defended by ancient weapons. Her armor was scorched, her weapon was empty, and her team was scattered across 100 kilometers of radioactive wasteland. She had accomplished her mission by methods that no military academy had ever taught, and for reasons that no alien mind could truly understand. Actual to Fleet Command, she transmitted as rescue ships began landing. New Byzantium is secure. Defense grid is eliminated. Civilian evacuation can proceed. Copy that. Outstanding work. But Martinez knew that Command did not really understand what had happened here. They saw successful mission completion and acceptable casualty rates. They did not see the moment when Williams had chosen to die rather than let civilians burn. They did not see Echo Team's final charge against impossible odds. They did not see 23 humans who had decided independently that some things were worth any price. As the evacuation ships lifted off carrying civilians to safety, Martinez realized that the galaxy would remember this day differently than humans would. The aliens would see it as proof that humans were weapons of mass destruction. Humans would see it as proof that sometimes being a weapon was the only way to protect the innocent. The distinction mattered, but not as much as the fact that 2.3 million beings would go home to their families, because 200 humans had decided that impossible was just another word for necessary. Colonel Harrison's voice came over the command channel one final time. Task Force mission complete. Well done, people. Let's go home. The 23 survivors of humanity's most successful military operation gathered at the evacuation point, carrying wounds that would never fully heal and memories that would define the rest of their lives. They had accomplished something that the galaxy had thought impossible, using methods that violated every rule of civilized warfare. And they were already preparing for the next impossible mission, because somewhere in the galaxy, someone else would need the kind of help that only humans seemed capable of providing. Even if it killed them. Especially if it killed them. Captain Sarah Martinez stood at the observation deck of Orbital Station Genesis, watching the steady stream of cargo ships moving between Earth and the outer colonies. 6 months had passed since New Byzantium, and the galaxy still felt different. Trade routes that had once brought alien merchants to human space now carried only automated cargo drones. Diplomatic meetings that had once occurred in comfortable conference rooms now took place in neutral space with armed escorts. The 23 survivors of Task Force had been decorated, promoted, and quietly transferred to positions where their experience could be studied and analyzed. Martinez now served as an instructor at the Advanced Tactical Training Center, teaching methods that the galaxy called impossible to soldiers who thought they were normal. "Another consultation request," her aide reported, handing her a digital tablet. "The Defense Force wants advice on siege warfare protocols." Martinez reviewed the request with the weary recognition of someone who had received dozens of similar communications. Since New Byzantium, human military expertise had become the most requested and least welcomed commodity in galactic space. Everyone wanted to understand how humans achieved impossible results. No one wanted to implement the methods that made those results possible. "Schedule a," she instructed, "standard briefing package, and remind them that our tactics require cultural adaptations that most species cannot implement." The aide nodded and departed, leaving Martinez alone with her thoughts and the endless view of human space. Through the observation deck's transparent aluminum, she could see the construction scaffolding around the new fortress stations that now protected every major human world. The galaxy had requested additional security measures after New Byzantium, suggesting that human military capabilities made other species uncomfortable. It was a diplomatic way of saying that the galaxy was afraid of its own defenders. Her personal communicator chimed with an incoming message from Admiral. The text was brief. "Joint training exercise scheduled for 800. Please review attached mission parameters. Your assessment will be valuable." Martinez opened the mission files and felt her heart sink. Another attempt to teach alien forces basic special operations. She had participated in 7 such exercises since New Byzantium. Each one had ended the same way, with alien forces unable to overcome their evolutionary programming and human forces unable to explain concepts that seemed natural but were apparently impossible to understand. At 800 local time, Martinez stood in Training Complex 7 watching a mixed unit of, and soldiers attempt a hostage rescue simulation. The scenario was simple: 6 armed hostiles holding 4 civilians in a fortified position. Standard galactic doctrine called for a 3-hour siege followed by negotiation. Human doctrine called for a 6-minute assault followed by medical treatment for survivors. "Begin exercise," announced the simulation computer. The alien forces moved with textbook precision. They established a perimeter, analyzed the target structure, and began planning a coordinated assault that would minimize casualties through superior firepower and tactical coordination. Their approach was methodical, professional, and completely predictable. Martinez watched the hostile AI adapt to their tactics in real time. By the time the alien forces were ready to assault, the computer opponents had already anticipated every move. The exercise ended with 4 dead hostages and significant friendly casualties. "Reset simulation," Martinez called out. "Human team, you are up." Echo Squad moved to the starting position with casual efficiency. Martinez knew each member personally. The team leader whose calm competence had saved her life in 3 different war zones. Park, whose technical expertise could crack any security system. Wright, whose physical presence could breach any barrier, whose medical skills had brought dozens of soldiers home alive. "Begin exercise," the computer announced. What followed demonstrated the gap between human and alien military thinking with brutal clarity. The human team did not establish a perimeter. They did not analyze the target structure. They did not plan a coordinated assault. Instead, they did something that made no tactical sense to any alien observer. They improvised. Sent Park around to the building's rear while Wright approached from the left flank. Established overwatch from an unexpected position. Then simply walked up to the front entrance and kicked down the door. The hostile AI, programmed to counter sophisticated tactical movements, had no response to aggressive simplicity. In 90 seconds, all 6 hostiles were eliminated, all 4 hostages were safe, and Echo Squad was preparing for extraction. "Exercise complete," the computer announced. Hostages secured with 0 casualties. The alien observer stood in stunned silence. Colonel of the Defense Force finally spoke. How did they coordinate without communication? How did they know when to move? How did they adapt so quickly when the initial plan changed? Martinez had tried to answer these questions dozens of times before. The words never seemed to translate properly. They trust each other, she said finally. Each team member knows that the others will make the right decision, even if it contradicts the original plan. But how? Pressed commander of the forces. Our soldiers require specific orders and predetermined protocols. How do humans function without rigid command structures? We train for chaos, Martinez replied. Our doctrine assumes that plans will fail, communications will be compromised, and individual soldiers will need to complete missions independently. We do not train our people to follow orders. We train them to achieve objectives. The silence that followed was familiar. Martinez had learned to recognize the moment when alien minds reached the limits of their understanding. They could see what humans accomplished, but they could not grasp how or why it worked. The methods you describe are impossible to implement with our forces, said finally. Our soldiers cannot function without clear command hierarchies and predetermined tactical protocols. Individual decision-making during combat operations would result in chaos and mission failure. Then you understand our situation, Martinez replied quietly. Later that evening, Martinez met with Admiral in her private office aboard the orbital station. The Admiral looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. Leading humanity's military forces had become a job that required balancing galactic politics with human nature, and the balance was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. How did the training exercise go? Asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. The same as always. They can see what we do, but they cannot understand how we do it. And they cannot adapt their forces to use our methods because their entire military culture is based on concepts that contradict human tactical thinking. Nodded and activated a holographic display showing current deployment patterns across human space. Red indicators marked locations where human forces were stationed. Blue indicators showed allied galactic forces. The pattern was clear. The two types of forces were increasingly separated. 3 more species have requested that human military advisors be withdrawn from their space, reported. They appreciate our effectiveness, but our presence makes their populations nervous. Are we becoming a threat to the people we are trying to protect? Martinez asked. We are becoming something the galaxy does not know how to categorize, replied. Our allies trust us but fear us. Our enemies respect us but cannot predict us, and our methods work too well for anyone to feel comfortable around us. Martinez studied the deployment patterns and recognized the emerging isolation. Human forces were being concentrated in human space, not because of military necessity, but because other species could not psychologically handle working alongside soldiers who violated their understanding of how warfare functioned. What do we do? She asked. Stood and walked to the observation window, looking out at the stars that had once promised a galaxy full of allies and friends. Now they seemed cold and distant, beautiful but unreachable. We do what we have always done, she said finally. We protect people who need protecting. We solve problems that others cannot solve. We accomplish impossible missions because someone has to accomplish them. Even if it means being alone. Especially if it means being alone. Martinez joined her at the window, watching a human patrol ship begin its journey to the outer rim where pirates still threatened civilian shipping. The ship carried 12 soldiers who would risk their lives to save strangers, using methods that the galaxy considered barbaric, but which consistently achieved results that no other military could match. The galaxy calls us Annihilation, Martinez observed. But every time we deploy, we save more lives than we take. We stop threats that conventional forces cannot handle. We protect people who cannot protect themselves. And they fear us for it, replied, because they cannot understand how we can be effective without being evil, how we can be violent without being cruel, how we can sacrifice everything for people we have never met and never will meet. The patrol ship disappeared into hyperspace, carrying its crew toward another impossible mission in a galaxy that needed their skills but could not accept their methods. Martinez realized that this was humanity's role in the galactic community, to be the guardians that no one wanted but everyone needed. Maybe the problem is not what we are, she said quietly. Maybe the problem is that the galaxy has never learned what it means to truly fight for something. Admiral turned from the window and looked at her with the expression of someone who had carried the weight of command through impossible circumstances. Then our job is to show them, not through doctrine or training exercises, but through example, by continuing to be what they need us to be, even when they cannot understand what that means. Martinez nodded, understanding that their conversation had defined humanity's future in ways that no treaty or alliance could. They would remain the galaxy's protectors, operating from the shadows of space and the margins of understanding. They would accomplish impossible missions and pay impossible prices because that was what humans did when faced with impossible problems. And if the galaxy could not accept their methods, at least it could benefit from their results. Outside the window, another ship prepared for departure. Another mission. Another group of humans ready to risk everything for strangers who would never know their names or understand their sacrifice. It was enough. It had to be enough. Because somewhere in the galaxy, impossible problems were waiting for people crazy enough to solve them. And humans would always be crazy enough.